The port was alive with shadows, and Elliot knew he was stepping into something much bigger than himself. Piecing it all together, Elliot realized the scale of the operation. It was global, and it was dangerous. The factory was a front, but the truth was hidden in plain sight, and Elliot wasn't leaving without it. Face to face with the mastermind, Elliot felt the weight of every choice he was about to make. The evidence was gone, but the questions remained. Had he done the right thing? The city moved on, but for Elliot, the shadows of his choice would never fade.
And illegal fishing are fueling the collapse of marine ecosystems around the world.
This is the homecoming freed slave Mien Na has been waiting for all his adult life.
For decades, thousands of vulnerable migrants have been forced to work on illegal fishing boats in the deep ocean.
An investigation by the non-profit environmental group Earthsight says IKEA likely sold children's furniture made from wood linked to illegal logging in Russia.
If you want to see illegal logging in action, there's probably no better place in the world than to go to the Russian Far East right now.
North Korea is like Game of Thrones, but without the dragons.
How has North Korea, one of the poorest countries in the world, managed to evade UN sanctions and pay for its nuclear weapons program? The answer is through a secretive government organization known as Bureau 39.
Chinese money launderers have partnered with Mexican drug cartels to efficiently launder the proceeds of the fentanyl trafficking.
It's a sinister industry hidden in plain view.
A new report from Reuters tonight revealing Chinese telecom company Huawei has close ties to Iran and Syria.
The scale and the scope of this is really quite extraordinary.
They don't want cameras in the restaurant, so we film in secret.
There's nothing shadowy about what's been going on for nearly 20 years. It's war, what Russia has been waging across NATO and EU territory.
Today we are announcing a superseding indictment against 5 officers of the Russian military intelligence agency known as the GRU.
The FSB in Russia is pretty much like what the KGB used to be.
I'm announcing our intent to designate the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, including its Quds Force, as a foreign terrorist organization, in accordance with Section 219 of the Immigration and Nationality Act.
Iran is Hezbollah's primary patron and has reportedly provides a terrorist group with hundreds of millions of dollars.
This is as black as the black market gets.
New South Wales police say they've smashed an alleged kill car syndicate, a network of contract criminals hired by Sydney's underworld to carry out murders, kidnappings and shootings.
Assassins are paid to silence their victims and to stay silent about it.
It starts with an attractive job offer abroad, and it ends in modern slavery.
In the global underworld of the black market economy, international sanctions are often spoken of as if they were the final word of punishment, a punishment that no state can withstand. Headlines present them as a nation's economic death sentence, a measure guaranteed to bring governments to their knees through sheer financial suffocation. On the surface, it makes sense. Shut a country off from international banks, limit its access to technology and trade, and soon factories will close, currency will collapse, and leaders will face pressure at home. That is the image most people picture. Sanctions as a decisive and unbending force that isolates a government until concessions are made. But history doesn't tell that story. Instead, it shows a much different reality taking shape underneath the surface. Despite having faced over 19,000 international economic sanctions since its initial attack on Ukraine in February of 2022, Russia has managed in multiple ways to circumvent sanctions. After the start of Russia's war, many international experts and geopolitical think tanks believe that Russia, with all the economic sanctions imposed on them, wouldn't be able to continue their missile strikes and brutal attacks, and would face a severe shortage of ammunition and weapons by the end of 2022. Remarkably, despite Russia's defense expenditures of only $109.45 billion in 2023 and a GDP of $2 trillion, Russia outproduced the United States and their NATO allies in ammunition, rockets, and tanks that same year. Russia's resources contrast starkly with the combined NATO defense spending of $1.29 trillion in 2023 and a combined GDP of approximately $51.5 trillion that same year. With all the international economic sanctions imposed on Russia following their attack on Ukraine in 2022, economists and political scientists expected their military productions to significantly decline the following year. Instead, their military production increased tenfold.
Experts warn about a global production decline, leaving the room filled with unease. But then the unexpected happens. Factories roar back to life. Production ramps up, faster than anyone could have imagined. Analysts are left speechless as their predictions crumble before their eyes. Under the night sky, the industrial complexes shine like beacons of resilience. In the end, resilience triumphs, leaving the world questioning everything.
In his evening address to the country on October 20th, 2024, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that since January 2024, Russia has launched 6,130 Shahed-type drones. Additionally, adding up all daily reports of the Ukrainian armed forces, Russia also fired around 1,500 missiles that same year. The big question is, how has Russia managed to circumvent these sanctions? Researchers found that Russia has utilized shell companies, front companies, offshore banking, and third-party procurement networks to evade international economic sanctions. Russia has also strengthened their ties with China, India, Iran, and a handful of Gulf states which they have traded oil, gas, and arms with outside Western-controlled jurisdictions. These nations, just like Russia, are indoctrinated with anti-US and Western sentiment and have refused to adhere to and enforce Western-imposed sanctions, providing Russia with alternative markets and supply chains. Ukraine's intelligence services have reported that foreign components remain prevalent in Russian missiles and drones, suggesting they have been able to successfully evade foreign export controls. Russia has leveraged shell companies in the United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Hong Kong, and Central Asia. These entities act as intermediaries to purchase restricted goods, such as dual-use electronics and tools for weapons production. They have also routed their weapons and supply purchases through friendly and neutral jurisdictions to mask the origin of their goods, such as microchips and drone components, which have been traced from Western suppliers to Iran and then shipped to Russia via front companies, a tactic known as parallel imports, to bypass their expulsion from the SWIFT banking system. Russia has relied on the use of cryptocurrency and China's cross-border interbank payments system, abbreviated CIPS for short. To bypass the G7's price cap on its seaborne oil, Russia has acquired a massive shadow fleet of hundreds of aging tankers. These ships operate outside of Western oversight, using non-Western insurance, and often turn off their transponders to hide their movements, allowing them to sell oil to China and India at prices above the cap. In a deliberate, state-sponsored effort to create payment methods that are completely independent of the traditional, Western-controlled financial systems. Russia has legalized the use of cryptocurrencies and digital assets for international payments. Sanctioned Russian entities, including state-owned companies, have been implicated in schemes using stablecoins, which are cryptocurrencies pegged to a fiat currency, such as the US dollar, to launder funds and acquire sensitive technologies. In October of 2025, the EU issued its first-ever sanctions targeting crypto asset developers linked to Moscow. The Russian mafia state has utilized cryptocurrency exchanges that do not enforce the Know Your Customer principle, a key cornerstone of financial regulation, compliance, and ethical banking, which allows them to anonymously convert Russian rubles from sanctioned banks into cryptocurrency and move their funds worldwide and convert them back into fiat currency in another country. In Russia's war effort against Ukraine, North Korea has become one of Russia's most strategic partners for both its direct military supply and manpower. After Russia began facing an acute shell hunger and their stockpiles of ammunition began to dwindle, they turned to North Korea, a country that maintains a massive supply of Cold War-era ammunition. Based on research and intelligence reports, North Korea has reportedly shipped millions of 122mm and 152mm artillery shells to Russia. According to some estimates, the Hermit Kingdom's artillery supply to Russia has accounted for approximately 40% or more of Russia's total artillery expenditure since late 2023. The DPRK's weapon supply to Russia also includes dozens of Hwasong-11 series short-range ballistic missiles and a series of heavy weapons systems, including 170mm Koksan self-propelled howitzers and 240mm multiple launch rocket systems. Recently, North Korea has also deployed their own military personnel to Russia to aid them in their war effort against Ukraine. According to South Korean and Western intelligence agencies, North Korea has sent thousands of troops to Russia. Recent estimates suggest approximately 10,000 of the DPRK's troops have been deployed near the Russia-Ukraine border and are supposedly being trained to be integrated into the Russian armed forces. In addition to their supply of weapons and military personnel, it is also suspected that North Korea has sent approximately 5,000 labor crews to Russia to assist them in reconstructing their infrastructure that has been damaged by Ukraine's counterattacks against Russia. The Islamic Republic of Iran has also become a major strategic partner to Russia in its war effort against Ukraine. Iran's military assistance has been a key factor in helping Russia sustain its long-term bombardment campaign against Ukraine. The nation of Iran has become a backdoor supply chain for Russia, which has supplied them with thousands of low-cost, high-impact kamikaze drones, such as their Shahed-136 and 131 one-way attack drones. In an effort to obscure their Iranian origin, Russia has rebranded the Shahed-136 drones as their own Garan-2 drones and the Shahed-131 drones as Garan-1 drones. Russia has used their supply of Iranian drones to carry out a series of attacks against major Ukrainian urban infrastructure, power supply facilities, and maritime seaport docking stations. In an effort to terrorize Ukraine's civilian population and exhaust the country's costly and limited Western air defense missile systems on their less expensive and more compact kamikaze drones. which are cheap, highly destructive, and more difficult for Ukraine's missile defense systems to intercept. Iran has further supported Russia by providing them with technical expertise and supplies to construct their own massive drone supply factory in the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in Tatarstan, a plant that now domestically produces Russia's very own Garan drones, giving the country their own self-sustaining supply for their war effort. Iran has also provided Russia with a myriad of other weapons and ammunition, including short-range ballistic missiles such as their Fateh 110 and Far 360 missiles, and thousands of 122mm and 152mm artillery rounds. In exchange for their supply of weapons and ammunition, Russia has provided Iran with some of its most advanced military hardware, such as their Su-35 Flanker-E fighter jets, Yak-130 advanced trainer aircraft, Mi-28 attack helicopters, and their potential S-400 air defense systems. In recent years, as the two countries have grown closer to each other and have faced a multitude of Western-imposed economic sanctions, Russia and Iran have agreed to a 20-year strategic partnership treaty. Iran is also currently finalizing a free trade agreement with the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union, and the two countries are currently in the process of connecting their banking and payment systems, including Russia's System for Transfer of Financial Messages and Iran's Standard Exchange Protocol for Automatic Measurement, to bypass Western sanctions and trade outside the US dollar. While claiming neutrality and stating not to take sides in Russia's war effort against Ukraine, the People's Republic of China has become a critical lifeline to Russia since 2022, as Russia has faced more and more sanctions and scrutiny from the West. China has become what NATO and Western intelligence agencies have described as a decisive enabler of Russia's war effort. While not directly shipping ready-made weapons to Russia, China has supplied them with the necessary components, machinery, and raw materials to build them, enabling Russia to effectively rebuild their industrial defense base under the guise of dual-use civilian trade. China's dual-use supply chain, aka the lethal gray zone, to Russia, includes items such as computer numerical control machine tools, which are high-precision industrial robots used to grind and mill metal plates to missiles, tanks, and artillery barrels. Microelectronics and semiconductors, which are used to supply power to the navigation system of Russia's missiles and drones. And nitrocellulose, which, in lesser words, is gunpowder, which has been a critical raw material Russia has used to create explosives and artillery propellants. Since the start of Russia's offensive attacks against Ukraine since 2022, many sources report that nearly 90% of Russia's high-priority dual-use imports now come from China. Before the war, China exported nearly no nitrocellulose to Russia. After the start of Russia's invasion, China's exports of nitrocellulose to Russia had skyrocketed to over 1,300 tons, greatly helping Russia overcome its shell hunger. From Pyongyang to the Indian Ocean, Asia's shadow economy spreads deep and wide, shaping hidden power. Founded in 1972 by Kim Jong-il, North Korea's Bureau 39, also known as Room 39, was initially created under the Finance and Accounting Department of the Workers' Party. This secretive slush fund was named after the office number of where it began its operations, Room 39. Bureau 39 is part of North Korea's third-floor secretariat, located in Pyongyang's Government Complex No. 1, alongside Office 35, which handles North Korea's intelligence, and Office 38, which handles the Hermit Kingdom's legal financial activities. Bureau 39's revenue comes from a wide range of illicit activities: high-quality counterfeit US supernotes, drug trafficking, arms sales, labor exploitation, cybercrime, and operations through front companies and shell firms. Its annual income is estimated between $500 million and $1 billion, funding both the Kim family and North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Bureau 39 is central to the court economy that keeps the regime in power. The Bureau relies on networks in China and underground banking systems known as Feiqian to launder money. Its shell companies operate in Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, and Africa, working with international criminal groups and illicit traders. These activities undermine sanctions, fuel organized crime, and destabilize global financial systems, serving as a financial lifeline for Kim Jong-un's regime. Bureau 39 has also overseen state-sanctioned production of high-purity methamphetamine and heroin in government-run labs disguised as pharmaceutical or chemical facilities. North Korean meth, often reaching 98% purity, is widely distributed across East Asia and beyond. North Korean diplomats and embassy staff have repeatedly been implicated in drug smuggling. Protected by diplomatic immunity, they act as ideal couriers, transporting narcotics with minimal risk. They have used diplomatic pouches, immune from security checks, to move cash, gold, and drugs across borders. Embassies in Germany, Egypt, and several Scandinavian countries have been linked to these operations, revealing the regime's reliance on diplomatic channels to expand its global drug trade. Transnational crime syndicates have also worked with North Korean operatives. Japan's Yakuza assisting in distribution, China's triads managing logistics, the Russian mafia handling transport and resale, and Southeast Asian cartels facilitating cross-border smuggling. Shipments move through maritime routes, diplomatic channels, or third-party intermediaries, making detection difficult. In what would be considered modern slavery today, Bureau 39 sends North Korean citizens to logging camps in Russia, construction sites in the Middle East, and factories in China. The regime seizes up to 90% of their wages, generating millions annually. North Korea also operates the Pyongyang restaurant chain, with over 100 locations worldwide, mostly in China and Southeast Asia. These restaurants serve as money laundering hubs, where illicit cash is mixed with legitimate revenue. Russia's war in Ukraine has become a financial windfall for North Korea. Since the conflict began, Russia has purchased millions of artillery shells, and North Korea has deployed thousands of its own troops to support the Kremlin. Estimates suggest more than 10,000 North Korean soldiers have been sent to Russia, with their wages funneled directly into Bureau 39. China's Ministry of State Security, the MSS, acts as its main intelligence agency, and according to reports and US indictments, works closely with global organized crime. The Chinese government has been accused of using these syndicates as unofficial enforcers for tasks beyond the reach of diplomats. In the early 1990s, Tao Sijue, then Minister of State Security, stated that Chinese triad members are not all bad, and that, as long as they are patriotic, the party could work with them. This alliance became known as the Patriotic Triad. Since then, the MSS has allowed certain criminal organizations to operate with relative impunity in places like Macau and Hong Kong. In return, these groups act as thugs for hire, suppressing dissidents and enforcing the Chinese Communist Party's interests abroad. Southeast Asia has transformed into what the United Nations and security analysts now call a super accelerator for transnational organized crime. Today, the region stands as one of the world's most sophisticated hubs for industrial-scale cybercrime and synthetic drug production. But the criminal landscape doesn't stop there. Human trafficking, illegal gambling, and money laundering all thrive in the shadows. Weak and inconsistent cross-border law enforcement, loosely regulated economic zones, political instability, and the region's position along major global trade routes have created a perfect storm for organized crime. According to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, Southeast Asia has become a testing ground for transnational criminal organizations experimenting with new technologies, cyber fraud models, and underground financial systems. Cybercrime is now one of the fastest-growing criminal economies in the region, with hotspots in Myanmar's borderlands, Cambodia, Laos, and parts of Thailand and the Philippines. These operations run everything from romance scams and investment fraud to crypto-based laundering, deepfake-enhanced schemes, and underground banking. UNODC reports that these networks have built a criminal service economy using malware, artificial intelligence, and virtual asset platforms to wash billions of dollars. Casino-linked criminal networks have also taken root. Illegal online gambling, money laundering, cyber fraud, and human trafficking converge inside casino complexes that often serve as fronts for broader criminal enterprises. Human trafficking has become deeply intertwined with these operations. Victims are lured with fake job offers, smuggled across borders, and forced to work inside cybercrime compounds. In 2023 alone, online scams across Southeast Asia generated between $18 and $37 billion in losses, much of it driven by trafficked migrant workers coerced into the criminal machinery. One of the most powerful syndicates in the region is the Sam Gore Group, the company. Unlike traditional mafia families, Sam Gore operates like a corporate super syndicate. It's an alliance of 5 major triad groups: Hong Kong's 14K, Si Yi On, and Wo Xing Wo, Taiwan's Bamboo Union, and Guangzhou's Big Circle Boys, united under a mutual ceasefire and shared resources. Sam Gore functions like a Fortune 500 logistics empire. They source precursor chemicals from China, manufacture methamphetamine in the jungles of Myanmar, and distribute it across the Asia-Pacific. Their market share of the regional meth trade is estimated at 40 to 70%. The organization was originally led by Tse Chi Lop until his arrest in Amsterdam in 2021. He was extradited to Australia, convicted in 2025, and sentenced to 16 years in prison. Yet, because Sam Gore is so decentralized, the syndicate continues to operate with little disruption. Perhaps the most dangerous development in the region is the weaponization of special economic zones. These semi-autonomous areas in Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar were designed to attract foreign investment, but many have been overtaken by organized crime groups and now operate with minimal oversight. Sihanoukville in Cambodia, once a quiet beach town, was transformed into a gambling hub by foreign investors. When online gambling was banned, many of these casinos morphed into fortress-like fraud factories. The Golden Triangle Special Economic Zone in Laos, managed by the King's Roman Group, currently under U.S. sanctions, has become a de facto private city along the Mekong River. It functions as a safe haven for human trafficking, drug production, and money laundering. And in Myanmar's Myawaddy region, the KK Park Special Economic Zone has become one of the most notorious scam compounds in the world. Protected by ethnic border guard forces who take a cut of the profits, it stands as a fortified sanctuary for cybercriminal operations. In Southeast Asia, crime isn't just organized, it's industrialized. For much of the Middle East, the shadow economy isn't a side hustle. It is the economy. This is where sanctions evasion, ancient financial systems, and state-linked networks collide in the open. Take Syria, a nation that many analysts describe as operating like a narco-state. Its most infamous export is Captagon, a cheap, highly addictive amphetamine that moves through the region at industrial scale. Reports suggest elements within the Syrian regime and the 4th Armored Division oversee production. Once manufactured, the pills slip out through Jordan and Lebanon, hidden in pomegranates, grain shipments, even industrial machinery bound for the Gulf. Estimates of annual revenue range anywhere from $5 to $50 billion. And when that money needs to be cleaned, there's a place ready to do it. Dubai, often described as the laundromat of the Middle East, a city where luxury real estate, gold trading, and light-touch financial oversight create the perfect environment for illicit capital to disappear into glass towers and beachfront villas. Cash or crypto, no problem. Minimal checks, maximum discretion. Gold is another favorite. Smuggled from conflict zones in Africa, refined in the UAE, and re-exported as pristine bullion. Once it's melted and stamped, the past is erased. Then there's Iran, a country cut off from SWIFT and buried under sanctions, yet still very much alive economically. Its workaround is a global fleet of aging tankers sailing under flags of convenience. They switch off their transponders, go dark, and meet other vessels in the Persian Gulf or near Malaysia to blend crude oil and mask its origin before it's sold onward to buyers like China. Payments move through a maze of front companies in Turkey, the UAE, and Iraq. These firms generate invoices for humanitarian goods or construction materials to justify billions in transfers. On paper, everything looks clean. In reality, it's a shadow banking ecosystem built for survival. But the true backbone of the region's underground economy is older than any modern sanction regime: the Hawala system. the invisible bankers. A customer hands cash to a broker in Beirut. A partner in Istanbul hands the equivalent amount to the recipient. No money crosses borders. No digital trail. Debts are settled later through trade goods or third-party swaps. For millions of families, it's a lifeline. For armed groups and smugglers, it's an untraceable wire transfer. Across Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and beyond, the informal sector, the human shadow, makes up 30 to 50% of national GDP. Millions of undocumented migrant and refugee workers operate entirely in cash. Syrians, Palestinians, Southeast Asians. No contracts, no protections, no taxes. Just survival. And in that vulnerability, the same networks that move drugs, oil, and gold find a steady supply of labor and opportunity. In the Middle East, the shadow economy isn't hidden in the dark. It's woven into the fabric of daily life. A parallel system that thrives where the formal one fails. The real economy isn't always the one you can see. Unlike most regions of the world, where specific syndicates carve out specific sectors, Africa's shadow economy is fluid, a shifting web of opportunity and desperation. It's a convergence of crime, where the same dusty routes used to smuggle ivory are used to move narcotics, stolen goods, and weapons for insurgent militias. In many ways, Africa has become the world's primary extraction point and its most critical transit corridor for the global underground economy. In the Sahel and Sudan, artisanal wildcat mines churn out gold under the control of jihadist groups like JNIM. And paramilitary forces, such as Sudan's Rapid Support Forces. This is the conflict gold pipeline. Once the gold is dug from the earth, it's smuggled out by hand, slipped into carry-on luggage on commercial flights, or pushed across porous borders like Lomé or Kigali under forged paperwork. Most of that gold ends up in Dubai, and once it reaches the refineries, its bloody origins vanish. What began in the hands of a dusty, desperate child in the Sahel reappears as polished bullion in the glittering gold souks of the Gulf. Trade mispricing on Africa's gold alone creates $30 to $52 billion in annual value gaps, and the same pattern repeats with oil and diamonds. The result is devastating. African governments lose tax revenue, development stalls, and the continent becomes a net creditor to the world, losing more wealth through illicit flows than it receives in aid. Along the continent-spanning Ivory Highway, poaching has evolved far beyond local hunters. It's now industrialized, driven by international crime syndicates, most notoriously the Chroma Network, which has long managed the logistics of sourcing ivory and rhino horn from Eastern and Central Africa. Once harvested and carved, the contraband moves to ports like Mombasa or Lagos, hidden in hollowed-out timber or buried behind sacks of tea and coffee, then shipped quietly to Southeast Asia. Park rangers across Africa now face poachers armed with military-grade weapons. AK-47s, RPGs, bought with profits from the trade. It's a self-sustaining cycle of violence where every kill funds the next. To the west lies the Cocaine Coast, the world's new transshipment hub for South American cocaine. Highway 10, the 10th parallel north, has become the invisible maritime lane linking South America to West Africa. Ships and planes follow it to offshore anchor points, where they collect poached goods and narcotics before returning home. Countries like Guinea-Bissau have been labeled narco-states, where drug money dwarfs national GDP and military officials are woven into the trade. On the opposite side of the continent runs the heroin smack track: Kenya, Tanzania, Mozambique. Dhows sail from the Makran coast of Iran and Pakistan, offloading heroin onto small boats in international waters. This trade has spawned local heroin economies in coastal cities like Mombasa, where legitimate businesses often serve as fronts for laundering drug profits. And then comes the most tragic commodity of all: human beings. Africa's human trafficking networks exploit migrants seeking passage to Europe, women and girls forced into sex trafficking, children pressed into labor in mines, farms, and fishing camps, and refugees preyed upon by smugglers. The drivers are painfully familiar: poverty, conflict, weak governance, and massive informal labor markets. In Niger, the city of Agadez has become the de facto capital of human smuggling. Migrants are held in ghettos, waiting to be driven across the Sahara toward Libya. They pay smugglers thousands. If they run out of money, they're sold into forced labor, often into gold mines, or held for ransom, with torture videos sent to their families. To move money through this vast underground system, Africa's networks rely on informal value transfer systems, cousins of the Middle East's Hawala. No digital trail. Trusted brokers, weak or corrupt banks. These systems move remittances, profits, and laundered funds across borders with near-perfect invisibility. This is Africa's shadow economy, fluid, interconnected, and built on the monetization of scarcity, conflict, and human vulnerability. Across Europe, the so-called Peninsula of Peninsulas, a vast, intricate shadow economy hums beneath the continent's vibrant, cultured exterior. It doesn't roar like the jungles of the Congo or the deserts of the Sahel. It whispers, but its influence is global. Europe's black market economy may not feature warlords in fatigues, but it plays a different role. The role of architect, the engine of consumption, the master of logistics, the quiet engineer of financial complexity. Europe provides the shipping lanes, the accounting tricks, and the polished facades that allow the global black market to thrive. People talk about Miami as the gateway to the international drug trade, but few mention Europe's Rotterdam hub, the twin ports of Rotterdam and Antwerp. Millions of containers pass through these ports every year. That sheer volume makes them the perfect entry point for the drug lords of Latin America and Africa to slip their product into the bloodstream of Europe, and from there, the world. In the media, you've heard of La Cosa Nostra. You've heard of the Triads. But few have heard of the Macro Mafia, a violent criminal network operating in the Netherlands and Belgium, often of Moroccan descent, controlling a massive share of Europe's cocaine import trade. Their power has grown so immense, they've threatened the Dutch Prime Minister and allegedly ordered the assassination of investigative journalist Peter R. de Vries. Then there's the Ndrangheta, the Mafia of Calabria, the silent partner in Europe's drug empire. They're estimated to control up to 80% of Europe's cocaine trade, using Italy's Gioia Tauro port as their personal gateway and acting as wholesale brokers for the entire continent. But Europe's most unique financial crime isn't drugs. It's the carousel, the invisible heist, a form of VAT fraud so elegant, so deceptively simple, it drains nearly 50 billion euros from EU taxpayers every year, and often bankrolls organized crime and terrorism. Company A in France sells phones to Company B in Germany, VAT-free. Company B sells to Company C in Germany, charging 19% VAT. Company B collects the tax, then disappears. Company C exports the phones back to France and legally claims a VAT refund on money that was never paid in the first place. Organized crime groups run these carousels at industrial speed, siphoning billions straight out of national treasuries. From the west, cocaine arrives by sea. From the east, heroin arrives by land. Afghan heroin travels the Balkan route, the heroin highway, through Turkey, Bulgaria, the Balkans, and into Western Europe. Albanian, Serbian, and Montenegrin crime groups dominate this corridor. They've evolved from smugglers into logistics masterminds, controlling the supply chain from the Turkish border to the streets of London. Europe's stability has made it the world's favorite piggy bank for illicit wealth. London, nicknamed Londongrad, has become a final destination for stolen fortunes from Russia, Nigeria, and the Middle East. Shell companies in British overseas territories buy mansions in Knightsbridge, washing millions in dirty money behind polished stone facades. Countries like Cyprus and Malta have sold citizenship through golden visa programs, allowing questionable figures to purchase EU passports and gain access to the entire Schengen banking system. Europe is the world's most lucrative market for narcotics. A kilo of cocaine that costs $2,000 in Colombia sells for over 30,000 euros in Amsterdam. That markup fuels drug wars in Latin America. Europe is also one of the world's largest producers of synthetic drug precursors, the chemicals behind MDMA and ecstasy, feeding global demand. And throughout the world, Europe provides the final seal of legitimacy for dirty money.
corrupt official from Africa, a drug trafficker from Asia, can clean their illicit income simply by moving it into a Swiss bank account or a Parisian apartment. This is Europe's shadow economy. Polished, complex, and quietly essential to the global black market machine.
In Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, the underground shadow economy has evolved far beyond the drug trade. What once revolved around narcotics has transformed into what experts now call polycrime syndicates. These organizations don't just sell drugs. They operate as de facto governments, managing illegal gold mines, taxing legal businesses, and controlling migration routes. Today, South America's shadow economy is driven by two primary commodities: cocaine and illegal gold. In countries like Colombia and Peru, illicit gold mining has become more profitable and far less risky than cocaine trafficking. In Venezuela, amid the collapse of the state and the mass exodus of its population, a new kind of criminal organization emerged. Tren de Aragua, often referred to as the migrant parasite. Unlike traditional cartels focused on narcotics, Tren de Aragua recognized something else as a monetizable asset: human migration. With more than 7 million Venezuelan refugees fleeing the country, people themselves became the product. The group seized control of bus terminals and border crossings across South America, forcing migrants to pay fees simply to move. In some cases, women were smuggled across borders without upfront payment, but the cost came later. Passports were confiscated. Debts were imposed. Many were forced into sexual exploitation and prostitution to repay fees that, in some cases, were never meant to be paid off. Tren de Aragua was born inside Venezuela's infamous Tocorón prison, a facility so autonomous it featured a swimming pool, a zoo, and a nightclub. From inside this so-called five-star prison, the group coordinated crimes across 4 countries using WhatsApp. To the south, in Brazil, another prison-born organization followed a different path. The Primeiro Comando da Capital, the PCC, began as a prison gang inside São Paulo's penitentiary system. Over time, it evolved into one of the most powerful transnational criminal syndicates in South America. Members operate under a written code of conduct, pay membership dues, and adhere to a centralized chain of command. The PCC plays a major role in trafficking cocaine from Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia. It operates distribution hubs across Brazil, using them to ship narcotics across the Atlantic, into Europe and Africa. Brazil's seaports, especially Santos, serve as key export gateways. The PCC frequently partners with European criminal networks, including Italian and Dutch groups, acting as a wholesale supplier rather than a street-level distributor. Their profits are laundered through shell companies, front businesses, informal value transfer systems, and trade-based money laundering. Violence is used when necessary, but it is not chaotic. It is strategic. It enforces discipline, resolves disputes, and protects trafficking routes. Unlike traditional cartels, the PCC functions more like a Fortune 500 logistics company. Decentralized cells, centralized regulation, financial accountability, and long-term planning. This structure makes the organization resilient to arrests and leadership losses. Northwest of Brazil lies Colombia. Within Colombia operates one of the most powerful paramilitary-derived criminal organizations in Latin America, the Clan del Golfo, also known as the Autodefensas Gaitanistas de Colombia, the AGC. Born from the remnants of right-wing paramilitary groups after their official demobilization in the mid-2000s, the Clan del Golfo refused to disarm. Instead, it reorganized. They inherited military discipline, territorial control, and deep local intelligence networks, evolving from a regional force into Colombia's largest transnational criminal organization. Cocaine remains the backbone of the AGC's economy. To protect it, they control coca plantations, processing laboratories, and smuggling corridors. Positioning themselves along Colombia's Caribbean and Pacific coasts to export cocaine to Central America, Mexico, and Europe. The Clan del Golfo governs territory as a parallel state, imposing taxes, transport fees, and protection payments, often filling the vacuum left by weak government presence. Further north lies Central America, the warehouse and toll booth of the international drug trade. While South America produces narcotics, Central America stores them, moves them, and taxes their passage. Two rival gangs dominate this corridor, MS-13 and Barrio 18. Born on the streets of Los Angeles, Barrio 18 in the Rampart district, MS-13 in Pico Union, mass deportations in the 1990s exported these gangs back into Central America, transforming them into transnational criminal networks. Extortion is their backbone. Businesses, transit systems, street vendors, and residents are taxed, generating steady income while crippling local economies. They control street-level drug sales, act as retail distributors for larger cartels, and profit heavily from human trafficking and migration control, now their fastest-growing revenue stream. And beyond Central America lies the Caribbean. Within the shadow economy, the Caribbean functions as the logistics and laundering hub, the trampoline that bounces narcotics from South America to Europe and the United States. It is the shadow economy's middle sea, where shipments fragment, jurisdictions shift, money disappears, and identity is obscured. Here, scale becomes invisibility. South America produces the drugs. Central America warehouses them. The Caribbean moves them. Colombian narco legend Pablo Escobar, the father and face of the global drug economy, may be gone, but the era he symbolized never ended. It simply shed its myths, decentralized its power, and learned to survive without a single face.
No one expects the death of Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar to put much of a dent in the world cocaine trade. But as Diana Gonzalez reports, it does put an end to one of the bloodiest criminal careers in history.
North America, across the United States and Canada, hosts a very different kind of shadow economy. Here, the black market relies less on hidden jungle laboratories and more on white-collar secrecy, sophisticated legal loopholes, and the weaponization of domestic commerce. While offshore tax havens in the Caribbean often dominate headlines, the United States itself is one of the easiest jurisdictions in the world to establish anonymous and untraceable financial entities. States like Delaware, Nevada, and Wyoming actively compete for corporate registrations by offering strict anonymity protections. In some cases, forming a shell company requires less personal information than obtaining a public library card. Wyoming, in particular, has emerged as a hotspot for secretive wealth management. Financial architects have developed a structure known as the cowboy cocktail, layering unregulated trusts with anonymous limited liability companies to shield assets from creditors, tax authorities, and law enforcement alike. Because beneficial ownership remains obscured, these shell companies function as financial ghosts. They are routinely exploited by drug cartels, corrupt officials, and fraud networks to launder illicit cash. In recent years, Chinese money laundering organizations, known as CMLOs, have leveraged U.S. shell companies to exchange illicit U.S. currency for Mexican pesos, quietly bridging the gap between street-level drug sales and international finance. Further north lies Canada, a country that has inadvertently become a premier destination for global financial crime. Shielded by its polished reputation for integrity, this phenomenon has earned itself a name: snowwashing. A process by which dirty money is made to appear pure as the driven snow of the Great White North. International banks and regulators rarely scrutinize transactions originating from Canadian entities. Criminal networks exploit this trust, using Canada's clean image as camouflage. In reality, Canada's corporate registries suffer from severe transparency gaps, allowing companies to be formed without disclosing true beneficial owners. As a result,
Billions in illicit funds have flowed into luxury real estate markets in cities like Toronto and Vancouver, inflating housing prices while concealing the identities of buyers. Asian organized crime networks, particularly the triads, have refined this process through what is known as the Vancouver model, a laundering cycle that moves illicit funds through casinos, underground banking systems, and high-end real estate. Under this model, Chinese laundering networks clean profits generated by Mexican drug sales and, in return, facilitate the shipment of precursor chemicals and supplies needed to manufacture more narcotics. But money is only half the equation.
South of the United States lies the US-Mexico border, one of the most consequential fault lines in the global shadow economy. While narcotics flow north, a devastating current of firearms and ammunition flows south. This pipeline is known as the Iron River. Mexican authorities estimate that up to 500,000 US-manufactured firearms are smuggled south each year, arming the very cartels that dominate the drug trade. Lenient US gun laws have enabled straw purchasers, individuals with clean records, to legally acquire weapons on behalf of criminal organizations. The majority of these firearms originate from independent dealers near the border. Weapons that cannot be legally purchased in Mexico, but are readily available in the United States. The devastation caused by the Iron River has prompted Mexico to file a landmark $10 billion lawsuit against US firearm manufacturers and dealers, alleging that lax oversight has directly fueled cross-border bloodshed. The global shadow economy does not survive on violence alone. It survives on silence, secrecy, and distance. And those are things human beings can challenge. As citizens, there are steps we can take. We must demand accountability from those in power, closing corporate secrecy loopholes, enforcing transparency in banking, real estate, and trade, and imposing targeted sanctions on regimes and networks that profit from organized crime and human rights abuse. These systems persist not because laws do not exist, but because enforcement is selective and tolerance remains. Information is one of the most powerful tools we have. Whistleblowers, journalists, and investigators must be protected. Anonymous reporting mechanisms must be strengthened, allowing evidence of trafficking, corruption, and abuse to reach international bodies like Interpol, the International Criminal Court, the United Nations, and independent investigative networks. Crime syndicates collapse when secrecy fails. Illicit networks depend on legitimate systems to function. Transparency in banking, shipping, and corporate registries is not optional. It is essential. The shadow economy cannot survive without access to the light. The most dangerous myth is the belief that this world exists somewhere else. It does not. It moves through our ports, our banks, our markets, and our laws. It is sustained not by monsters, but by systems designed to turn a blind eye to the truth. The shadow economy thrives in the dark, but darkness is not inevitable. What is chosen can always be challenged. For more exclusive content and to continue combating global secrecy and corruption, like, comment, and subscribe to stay informed. Together, transparency becomes a choice, and accountability becomes a possibility.